Picture this. You walk into a medieval tavern expecting a friendly pint of beer by the fire. Instead, you get a hallucination-inducing poison served by a woman the villagers might burn at the stake tomorrow. Welcome to medieval drinking. Forget your craft IPAs and cozy pub nights. Medieval beer was a dangerous gamble. One wrong batch could leave you convulsing on the floor, drowning in a river for breaking the ale laws, or even starting a war. Think you could handle a pint in the 14th century? Trust me, you wouldn't last a single round. Today, we're diving headfirst into 9 medieval beer facts so outrageous you'll never look at your drink the same way again. Let's start with the Middle Ages version of a craft beer flavor booster, Gruit. Before hops became the star ingredient, medieval brewers spiced their ale with Gruit, a cocktail of local herbs and flowers. Sounds harmless, right? Until you learn that one of those herbs was black henbane, a nightshade relative with a reputation straight from a witch's apothecary. Medieval brewers loved black henbane because it made the drink stronger, but not in the way you might think. Small amounts gave you a trippy, floating high, the kind that made a dreary medieval day feel downright magical. But too much? You'd start hallucinating demons, writhing in seizures, and sometimes never wake up again. It gets worse. Medieval Gruit sometimes included hemlock, wormwood, and even deadly nightshade, all of which could turn your casual ale into a one-way ticket to the afterlife. Beer was more than just a thirst quencher back then. It was a risky, unpredictable brew that might feed your family one day and kill them the next. And since there were no standardized recipes, every tavern was like rolling the dice on your life. Next time you complain about a bad hangover, remember, medieval people sometimes died from theirs. Cheers to that, I guess. Next up, medieval quality control was a spectacle in itself. Forget lab tests, modern brewing regulations, or even a simple sip test. In medieval England, they had a professional beer inspector called, according to popular legend, though historians debate how real this was. The ale conner would pour a puddle of ale on a wooden bench and sit down in fresh leather breeches. After a short wait, he'd stand up. If his pants stuck to the bench, that supposedly meant the beer still contained unfermented sugars, proof the brewer had messed up the process and risked dangerous bacterial growth. A sticky butt meant a hefty fine or worse. Whether or not this sticky pants test ever really happened, we know for sure. Ale conners took their duties seriously. They inspected beer by taste, smell, and appearance, making sure brewers didn't water it down or cheat customers. So next time you see a health inspector with a clipboard, be grateful he's not dropping his pants to check your drink. Medieval beer was risky enough, and even the rumors about how they tested it were risky too. If you think a sticky pants inspection sounds wild, wait until you hear what happened to brewers who really messed up. In medieval society, serving spoiled or dangerous beer was treated like a crime against the whole community. After all, beer was safer than water and kept people alive. You were messing with their survival. So authorities came down hard. Under the assize of bread and ale, any brewer who sold tainted or toxic beaver could find themselves strapped to a ducking stool, a wooden chair on a long beam, dipped over and over into a dirty river, while the entire town laughed and pointed. It was part punishment, part public spectacle, and part deadly health warning for everyone else. In other towns, corrupt brewers faced the pillory, their heads and hands locked between boards as neighbors pelted them with rotten food and garbage. Imagine running a small brewery, missing a fermentation step, and ending up drenched and humiliated in front of everyone you knew. Beer was so essential that ruining it wasn't just bad business. It was borderline treason. These punishments might seem medieval in every sense of the word, but they worked. Next time you complain about health inspections, remember at least no one's dunking you in the river. And if you think medieval beer was just a man's game, think again. In towns across Europe, women, known as alewives, dominated the local brewing trade. These women brewed ale in their homes, selling it fresh to neighbors and travelers before beer was industrialized. They worked with giant cauldrons, stirring their bubbling wort with long wooden paddles that resembled broomsticks. To attract customers, many wore tall pointed hats that helped them stand out in busy markets. Cats prowled around their grain stores to keep mice away. Over time, these perfectly normal tools of the trade, the tall hat, the bubbling pot, the cat, and the broom, were twisted by folklore into the classic witch stereotype we recognize today. It makes sense. To medieval eyes, a woman with herbs, a steaming cauldron, and a black cat might look suspiciously magical. But there's no solid evidence that alewives were systematically hunted as witches just for brewing. The witch trial craze came later and had more to do with mass hysteria than beer. Still, it's a chilling reminder of how women could be demonized for simple, honest work. So the next time you see a witch on a Halloween poster, think twice. She might have just been trying to sell you a fresh pint. While alewives kept the towns drinking, monks had their own powerful brew bubbling behind monastery walls. In medieval Europe, monasteries weren't just places of prayer. They were centers of brewing innovation. One legendary group, the Paulaner monks of Munich, crafted a beer so rich and strong it was practically liquid bread. Their brew, called Doppelbock, could hit temp alcohol, thick as a stew, packed with nutrients. During Lent, when solid food was off limits, the monks were allowed to drink. So they survived the fasting season by living almost entirely on this hearty beer. It wasn't exactly a loophole, it was their salvation. Rumor spread that their beer was so tasty it couldn't possibly count as a true penance. The Vatican demanded a sample to investigate, but by the time the barrel made its slow, bumpy journey to Rome, the beer had spoiled, tasting horribly sour. The Pope, horrified, declared it was perfectly suitable for fasting. So the monks kept drinking their high-powered brew, day after day, through Lent. You might say their faith was strong, but their beer was even stronger. But not every medieval beer tale was about faith or friendly neighbors. For centuries, brewers experimented with all kinds of strange additives, herbs, roots, even animal products, hoping to boost flavor, shelf life, or, let's be honest, profit. You could find soot, bitter herbs, or questionable animal bits bubbling right alongside barley in a medieval brew. These wild experiments weren't always harmless. Some brewers cut corners with cheap toxic fillers, making people sick or even killing them. In some towns, there were rumors of hallucinations, fevers, or violent sickness traced back to bad beer. By the early 1500s, the authorities had enough. In 1516, Bavaria introduced the Reinheitsgebot, the world's first beer purity law. It restricted beer to just water, barley, and hops. No weird herbs, no animal parts, no random garden experiments. The idea was partly to protect drinkers, but also to stabilize grain prices, so people wouldn't waste valuable bread grains on dangerous beer. Next time you see brewed under the purity law on a German label, remember, that proud tradition came from centuries of risky brewing gone wrong. Sometimes, strict rules really do make the world a better place, or at least a safer place to get drunk. Beer didn't just cause medieval hangovers, sometimes it sparked open rebellion. In 14th century Ghent, the local count tried to control the sale of gruit, the herbal blend used to flavor beer before hops took over. By holding a monopoly on gruit, he could tax every brewer, squeezing money out of something people relied on every day. Beer wasn't a luxury in Ghent, it was essential. So when the taxes grew unbearable, the frustration boiled over. In 1379, the townspeople rebelled. They blockaded grain shipments, cut off river routes, and even attacked the count's garrisons. Historians today say the gruit tax was just one spark in a much bigger fire of political and economic anger. But beer was at the heart of it, a symbol of survival and freedom. The uprising spiraled into a 6-year war known as the Ghent Revolt, with pitched battles and burned-out strongholds. Think about that. A beer tax helped set off a war that lasted longer than most medieval marriages. So the next time you argue over which IPA is best, remember, medieval beer drinkers fought and died for the right to brew. Even when medieval beer wasn't poisoned on purpose or taxed to death, it could still turn deadly. One hidden danger lurked right inside the grain, a toxic fungus called ergot. This fungus infected rye and barley, releasing powerful alkaloids that caused a disease known as St. Anthony's fire. Victims felt as if their arms and legs were burning from the inside, suffered violent convulsions, and saw horrifying hallucinations. Some medieval chroniclers described entire communities dancing wildly, tearing at their own skin, and screaming about devils after festivals, all likely triggered by contaminated grain. Most historians agree ergot struck hardest through bread, since the heat of brewing generally reduced its toxins. But some suspect that big communal beer batches, especially those made with poorly cleaned malt, might have been vectors during large gatherings. Without any understanding of fungus or germs, people blamed witches, demons, or divine punishment for what was really food poisoning. Imagine showing up to a medieval feast, lifting your mug in a toast, and hours later finding half the village rolling on the ground, convinced they were cursed. And if you think medieval beer was strictly an adults-only beverage, think again. In the Middle Ages, beer was a basic survival drink, even for kids. That wasn't about partying, it was about staying alive. Wells and streams were often polluted with human waste, animal runoff, or decaying trash, making plain water a risky gamble. Instead, families turned to small beer, a weak ale with around 0.5 to 1% alcohol, just strong enough to kill off dangerous bacteria. Children drank it with nearly every meal, sometimes starting as toddlers. Church and guild records showed generous beer allowances for everyone. Even teenage apprentices in places like St. Paul's Cathedral in London were rationed about a gallon of ale a day. Archaeologists also confirmed that beer provided key calories, especially for working children who needed the extra energy. However, not every peasant household relied on beer alone. Recent studies suggest some rural families still drank well water if they could keep it clean, while beer remained a safer choice in crowded towns. So the next time you see a medieval painting of a child with a mug, don't assume they were misbehaving. That was their medieval version of a juice box, with just enough buzz to keep the germs away.